Welcome to Youth Ministry Unscripted, the Rooted Youth Ministry podcast, where we talk real, honest, and raw about gospel-centered youth ministry. I'm one of your co-hosts, Danny Kwan, and today we have Josh joining us. Say hello, Josh.
Hey.
Josh, good morning. And today we have a special guest on our podcast, Andrea Lee. Andrea, could you say hello?
Hi.
I'm glad to introduce Andrea. She's an author of a new book on a really important subject for youth workers. The book is called Body Image by P&R Publishers. It's going to be released in late April, and you should have information about it. But more than the book itself, which we really want to get in the hands of adults, youth workers, and especially for teenagers, it's a devotional. We want to hear about this important subject matter from Andrea. So Andrea, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, introduce yourself? And while you do that, because I read some of your book, include why you wrote this book on this very important subject matter of body image, and it's called Body Image.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Danny and Josh. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak about this. I'm a biblical counselor in Atlanta, Georgia. I've been married for almost 20 years. We haven't had kids. Haven't been able to have kids, but we have lots of nieces and nephews that we love. I counsel adult women and also teen women. And body image isn't always the first topic that we tackle, but it's a component of many of the struggles we talk about. One of the reasons, wrote this book for several reasons, I picture body image struggles sometimes like a thief, especially for young women. It steals joy, attention, and focus off of the purposes that God has for them in their lives. And I think about my nieces who are ages 2 to 17, and I want to equip them with biblical wisdom to know how to push back on some of the pressures that they're facing and some of the ways that they may misunderstand or not fully grasp the ways God's purposes for their bodies.
Mm-hmm. Andrea, why do you think this is such an important topic for teenagers today?
Yeah, there's lots of ways to answer this question. I'm going to start kind of at the top. I think talking about body image with teenagers is a discipleship issue. Mm-hmm. There's underneath this issue is anxiety, fear, shame, guilt. And when we talk about this, we can actually get to the heart. What do we want? Why do we want those things? What do we think matters? What gives us value? So it actually helps us get to the value system, the functional theology that our teens are operating by. So how you treat your body, how you talk about your body and the bodies of your friends or people that you know really reveals something about what you truly believe. So to me, that's what makes this so powerful, is that we can go to the heart. We can talk about what people, especially young women, believe and want and why they want those things. I also think it's a beautiful topic because it's a very hot topic in our culture to show the sufficiency of Scripture. Mm-hmm. We get to take kind of this seemingly very modern struggle where there's lots of talk about it on social media or entertainment or etc. And we get to say, okay, this ancient book actually has everything we need to tackle this really painful topic. And I love that. I love being able to say, look at all the things. I would love to know from you, Danny and Josh, is there like one passage that springs to mind when you think about body image?
Well, I think, one body image. Well, I've thought a lot about theology of the body, right?
Okay.
You were bought with a price, therefore glorify God with your body, right? I'm on the spot a little bit. Is that 1 Corinthians 6? Yeah. Yeah. And just the idea of, well, one of the things I love about your book, I haven't read the whole thing, but it's 31-day devotional. It has a gospel progression to it, right? And so it looks like it starts out at the kind of 30,000 foot view. What is a body? Who decided our body? God created our bodies, that kind of stuff. But we're broken by sin, and that means our bodies are our bodies are broken. Our thoughts about our bodies are broken. Our intentions about what we do with our body is broken. And then what did Jesus do for us, and what now do we do with our bodies? I think 1 Corinthians 6:19 is kind of encapsulates a lot of that, right? Because of what Jesus has done, our bodies now have a purpose, and that's to be restored and be redeemed, and then live out using, I think it's Romans 6, using our bodies as instruments of righteousness. Yeah.
I love that. I love that. It's funny. I think you went to the heart of it. I think a lot of pastors, it's hard. Like what we kind of scramble thinking body image, the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of young women hear Psalm 139. You are fearfully and wonderfully made. And sometimes if that's the only thing we say and it doesn't help our body image struggles, it can be like, well, I guess I will say, I remember when I struggled really intensely in college. So I was like 18, 19 when my struggles were at their worst. And I remember very well-meaning, lovely people talking to me about this verse. And I felt really guilty that it didn't kind of work for me. I was like, okay, I'm fearfully and wonderfully made, but I make all sorts of choices that affect the size, the shape, the way others people perceive me. So how do those two things go? And now I realize that when David wrote that psalm, he wanted the focus to be on God, the creator, and the creative, amazingly creative ways that he formed our bodies. So that our eyes have 2 million working parts, that our pancreas and gallbladder do things without our conscious input,
Mm-hmm.
that our, some of us are affected by disabilities, but even in that very painful struggle, our bodies are still fearfully and wonderfully made. And that should point focus on God and not how we, the beauty that we perceive in our bodies.
Andrea, I think that's really good because I know that your target audience is likely a student who deals with a negative feeling about their body in some way, right? But regardless of what we feel, like an overfixation on the body on one side or the other, it is a problem, right? So a kid who hears, I am fearfully, wonderfully made, some kids that have negative thoughts about their body are thinking about it so much negatively that they need to be pulled forward and say, no, my body is a positive thing. But then there are also kids who would say, yes, I am fearfully and wonderfully made, like I look great. And those kids, those people, we do this too, right? They need to have an understanding that, no, my body is broken by sin. My body is actually decaying, like the moment that I'm alive, like the death process has begun. And that fixating on it and making it seem like it's the ultimate. I think you mentioned Colossians in your introduction. And I think that's it, right? Like an overfixation or an underfixation is really about like what we do with our body to glorify God. Yeah, I think that's super important.
Well, and this is maybe, I didn't focus a ton about this in the book, but Colossians really, Paul is unpacking the way that you treat your body doesn't earn you favor with God. And treating your body harshly doesn't give you status with God. So this is why at the end of Colossians 2, he says, why are you submitting to regulations like do not handle, do not taste, do not touch? It's like self-made religion. It has an appearance of godliness, but it actually does not do anything to prevent the indulgence of the flesh. And there are some young women who spiritualize a body image struggle. And this is what that might be like. God says I need to be self-controlled and disciplined. And the way that I show I'm self-controlled and disciplined is by being thin. Well, that's a huge jump. We do need to be self-controlled and disciplined, but the result of thinness and what our culture says is important gets imposed on that. And so it's like, oh, that equation is missing like 10 really important big pieces. And realizing that treating our bodies harshly, whether that is through an eating disorder, over-exercising, or through like turning to food as a refuge where we're maybe overindulging and hurting our bodies that way, neither of those extremes earn favor with God.
Mm.
They're turning to food or exercise or the body as a refuge instead of to our Savior.
Yeah.
One of the most alarming trends we're seeing in teenagers today is the prevalence of anxiety. If one of your children or a teenager you know is struggling with anxiety, we are thrilled to share a resource to help. Rooted's 2023 book release with PNR Publishing, Anxiety: Finding a Better Story. It's a 31-day devotional for teenagers written by mental health counselor and friend of Rooted, Liz Edrington. As a teenager, Liz felt overwhelmed by anxiety. Now that she's a mental health counselor, she wants to pass on what she's learned. Just understanding what anxiety is makes a big difference. But what makes an even bigger difference is understanding what God has to say about it. With daily scripture readings, breathing exercises, and additional mental health resources, this little book offers comfort and help for teenagers in the midst of their anxiety. We invite them to see how their anxiety fits into God's big story and to learn how Jesus can bring peace.
Speaking about kind of the audience that you're writing for and thinking about, I always say every father should have a daughter. And I had 3 sons, so I sorry, but uh, but I had 3 beautiful sons, and so is body image just a female issue, or does it relate to men and boys also? And could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And let me back up and just say, like, what do we mean by body image?
Yeah.
Kind of lots of ways to slice it. It's the thoughts and feelings you have about your physical body. And it also includes a subjective mental picture that you have of yourself, which could be accurate. It could be more accurate or less accurate. And that's one of the things that we see. Sometimes teen women have a really drastically different perspective of their body than is what reality is. So if we're talking about body image, the thoughts and feelings that you have about your body, everybody has a perspective on what their body is, what it's for, how they should treat it. So in that sense, there's no temptation that's not common to all. There's no pressure that's not common to all people. So men and boys also struggle with this. It's not just a female issue, but it does seem to disproportionately affect females with the intensity that it affects them. I'd love actually to, you all might have some really, I know you all would have some very insightful thoughts about that. It's very tempting to kind of point to social media, which I think is an accelerator, but not a cause. And so when I struggled, which was 25 years ago, I had a flip phone, like my senior year of college. I had I did not have social media. I had great parents too, who really had a healthy perspective. They talked to me in very biblical, loving ways. So there wasn't parental pressure to look a certain way. So I didn't have social media. I didn't have parental pressure. What I did have was a perfectionist at heart. And I wanted to be seen as perfect by the important people that I valued and loved in my life. So I don't want to lay blame where blame is not due, but the way teen girls interact and the time they spend on social media does seem to take this struggle from hard to desperate.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that is one. But I would love to hear what do you all think might make this maybe more impactful for women, or maybe not. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I mean, I'm just thinking that's such a good point. If we as youth workers or adults think about even, iPhone came out in 2006, before iPhone, there were still struggles with body image and the reasons why and the hard issues why. I think that's important for those who were serving with teenagers think about. And again, social media, is your term, is an accelerant, but there are a lot deeper hard issues and struggles in that. And so we just don't go to the easy answer, oh, it's social media, but really try to come to the teenagers with really the gospel and the good news, and how we can, because again, it wasn't always social media issue.
Yeah.
Right.
I've been reading Jonathan Haidt's Anxious Generation, which I know is like old news now. It came out last year. But if you're a youth pastor and you haven't read that, either read it. It's kind of big and a little bit academic, but Andrew Huberman interviews him in a podcast, and you get like an hour and a half. It's a really good like starter for what he's talking about. I think with girls, I don't know that I could give a huge opinion about why girls are so affected more than guys in this particular area. But I think that if you're a girl and you don't have a smartphone, you don't have social media, if you're prone to deal with like self-comparison or something, the opportunities that you have for self-comparison are limited to the people in your social sphere. And what you hear is other people getting complimented for what they're wearing or their appearance in some way, or they're getting attention from boys or whatever it is, that you have that interaction. But in social media, you have just endless views of women who you could compare yourself with, and then the responses of other people to that. So, and an algorithm that if you get fixated on that, pushes it and pushes it and pushes it and pushes it.
Yeah.
And I think that's why you have such a steep decline in mental health among girls, because if they're already prone, obviously all girls don't deal with this, but if they're already prone to that and they're going to get fixated or captivated by it, it's just going to continue to push that and make it even more of a problem. Whereas like when we were younger, you didn't have those opportunities, but people still dealt with this because you're still seeing that kind of feedback in your own social sphere. It's just not as constant as it is in a social media setting.
Yeah.
I think
The echo chamber is not as loud. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely. And I think men's bodies are valued in ways that are a bit more flexible than women's bodies. And men are valued for things apart from how they look in ways that women, it's not quite as clear. So a woman might be very successful in her career, may be very academically trained, and has succeeded in success metrics that we would identify as, wow, that's amazing. But if she also doesn't look a certain way, it's devalued. And so I think, and in our culture, and I think maybe in every culture, in the book I talk about Rachel and Leah, beauty is powerful. Beauty commands attention. It is a form. This is why a lot of women, when they grow older, they realize that I'm not, I don't feel as powerful anymore. And so I think about with Rachel and Leah, they were both using their bodies to get something that they wanted, but in very different ways. So you have sisters who are, I'm sure that Leah felt compared to Rachel her whole life. Rachel, the younger sister, who is gorgeous, and this handsome young man comes into the village. Jacob immediately falls in love. I mean, that's kind of, he may not have immediately, but it's like he was pretty captured pretty quickly with Rachel's beauty. And crazy turn of events, they both end up married to Jacob. And Leah says, I'm going to use my body, because we can tell how she names her boys, to get my husband to love me. My husband will love me if I use my body in a way that he approves of. And Rachel, on the other hand, God doesn't give her children for several years. And she says to Jacob, give me children or I'm going to die. And so her beauty actually did not make her secure in her marriage. Her physical beauty that had commanded attention, had commanded power, suddenly wasn't delivering what she wanted it to deliver. So I just think it's a fascinating story about how women seek to use their bodies to get love, attention, affection, affirmation, in ways that really obscures God's love. That's not where the focus is. And that's a big part of this.
Yeah.
We are so excited to share that we have a new opportunity for folks working in family ministry. The Rooted Family Ministry Mentorship Program. It provides both small group and individual coaching for volunteers, youth pastors, or associate pastors who oversee family ministry in their church context. This 12-month program includes small groups of 6 to 8 led by one mentor in both a cohort and an individual setting through a carefully crafted curriculum designed to help you grow spiritually as an individual and as a leader in your congregation. At the end of the program, we expect you'll be prepared to equip the volunteers and parents in your congregation to disciple the next generation to know and love Jesus. Additionally, when you complete the program, you'll receive a Rooted Family Ministry certificate to affirm your commitment to join God in the work He is doing in the lives of the families you serve.
You know, Andrea, one of the things I found kind of eye-opening, I'd love you to talk about, is just I think I'm like a lot of people who, when I think about body image, my mind immediately goes to eating disorder. And I just kind of put it all in that same category. But I did notice in your book that you cover a broader spectrum of issues that are both physical and spiritual. So I'd love to just talk, like, give us the broad scope of what you would say body image falls under. What kind of student, what kinds of things might they be dealing with that they would benefit from reading your book?
I think I was in college, I was wrestling with, I didn't have a name for it. I couldn't have told you, body image is a piece of my struggle. But I hated the way I looked. I actually hated that. Part of my story is I just have a huge appetite. I can eat more than a lot of men. And even my husband, I'll eat my husband any day. And so I was looking at, I eat so much. This cannot be right. And thin is best. And now that's the cultural context that I was coming from. Not everyone has that standard or ideal. That's where I was coming from. And so it just always felt like I was in a wrestling match with, why do I hate my body? Why is it so hard to control? What is wrong with me? I cannot be normal. Why don't I look like her? Why didn't I think to work? I should be working harder at exercising or disciplining myself with food. So there was a lot of painful thoughts that I didn't know exactly how to identify. A lot of them, there was a lot of comparing and a lot of just, I've got to work harder. I'm not paying attention enough to my body, and I need to look a certain way. So kind of the lie that gets absorbed. I don't think anybody actively chooses to believe this. We just kind of absorb that the key to a happy, successful life is a certain physical appearance. And nothing, that's kind of your entry ticket into anything else. If you don't have that, then, so I think with women's, I do write to women. I think men and women, their relationship to food, the time and effort and energy they spend on working out or making decisions around their bodies are going to be a good tip-off that this might be something we can think about. You mentioned eating disorders, and these are two separate categories. So body image struggles and eating disorders are two separate things. They're interrelated, but not the same thing.
Right.
And I think one of the ways I like to describe it is how we think and what we want affects the decisions we make and our behavior. So what we want and what we think about our bodies is going to affect how we eat, how we exercise. And sometimes the more disordered the thinking and maybe the more disordered the worship, that paves the way into using food and or exercise in ways that actually affect our physical health. So eating disorder is a description of a set of behaviors that it may not mean you're underweight or overweight, especially with binge eating or bulimia. A teen might actually be at what's considered a normal weight, but they have an incredibly dysfunctional relationship with food and they are suffering. So I think you can't look at somebody and know. Sometimes their bodies, you might think, I want to ask them some more questions, but they may have a lot of painful struggles that outwardly you would never know. Josh, I'm not sure I answered your question. You want to redirect me?
No, I think that's great. Yeah. So all I was saying was that I think people tend to, and I have been one of those people, limit the thoughts about body image to be only centered around weight, essentially. But now you got me thinking. I'm thinking about we've already had the discussion. Does this, just deal with girls? And that might be there might be a higher percentage there. But I'm thinking you got a boy who's a late bloomer and he's shorter than everybody else. You got a now I'm thinking about the boy stuff. There's a boy who's just kind of a little more scrawny and he's got all these guys that are getting they're getting big and muscly, or they're, think about the puberty period, like that whole thing for guys and girls, despite like regardless of any kind of like weight gain, the puberty years, I feel like this kind of thinking, this book could benefit someone who's like, oh my gosh, I'm so much shorter than everybody else. Oh my gosh, I'm developing ahead or behind everybody else in my age group. And all of us could, in those kinds of scenarios, could benefit from like God has made me for a purpose, and he's physically designed me for a purpose. And I shouldn't be so fixated just on my appearance or this moment, but on entrusting that to the Lord. I think that's great.
Yeah. I love that.
And maybe bald or balding men.
Thanks, Danny. Thank you.
Worse than bald. So anyway. So Andrea, you've been kind of touching on this, but as we think about, again, it's not about the book, but the subject matter is so important. And so that's why I hope people really pick up this book called Body Image. But can you elaborate a little bit more on what makes body image such a difficult and maybe even terrible issue for teenagers to deal with, especially for those of us on this podcast who are serving and loving teenagers?
Yeah. I really wrestled with how to answer this because I think I have statistics. I won't say them all, but body image struggles. Let me say this first. I think it's such a difficult issue and so important because it can seem like our biggest problem for people for young men or young women who are struggling with this. It can feel all consuming. There is an obsession, and I don't use that in a technical sense, but just like it's filling a lot of our thoughts and feelings. Or whenever I go to a party, I'm there. Well, I'm supposed to be there to enjoy other people and maybe encourage them and just enjoy who they are as people. But I am like, I just saw a girl come in. She's more stylish. She's thinner. She's prettier. And now all I can think about is how much I hate my body. Well, that's gonna have a real effect. So I think it can confuse us about our biggest problem. And a lot of times when I'm working with a young lady, this is not the first conversation I have, but we will eventually talk about what is your biggest problem. It's not how you look. It's your sin against the holy God who created you and who loves you and wants to be in fellowship with you. And so we get to talk. The gospel really sets us free from self-focus. And more than just like, hey, you shouldn't do that. There can be part of that. We can have that discussion. But the freedom of not having to think about ourselves all the time and to actually turn our thoughts and attention to God, loving God with all of our hearts and minds and souls, and loving other people as we already love ourselves. And so I kind of just like, I want to just, like, there's a world out there that doesn't hinge on how you look to enjoy it, and really wanting to bring it to the gospel. Like, and if they're a believer, just being able to remind them, your biggest problem is behind you. When Jesus lived a perfect life and died in your place and rose from the dead, and you put your faith and trust in him and you repent, your biggest problem is behind you. No matter how much weight you gain, nothing can separate you from God's love. No matter what your skin looks like, what your hair looks like, if you have a debilitating illness, maybe it's cancer, maybe there's an injury, something that would happen to our physical bodies, it will be hard, and God will help you, but it's not your biggest problem. Your biggest problem is behind you.
Amen.
So
That's great.
That's where I want to get. Now, I want to say one other thing. I think this is dangerous and difficult issue for teenagers because sometimes there's a whatever it takes attitude. So whatever it takes, I'm going to look like the ideal that I have embraced for my culture, for my age group, whatever. I will not eat. I will overexercise. I will get a job. I will, whatever it takes, I will do what it takes to be praised and celebrated by the people around me. Now, I think this also can lead, this is not always the case, but it can lead people into sexual sin because they are saying, I will know I'm beautiful and chosen and wanted if I do these sexual things that my boyfriend or girlfriend is expecting of me. And so there's a whatever it takes. I'll do whatever it takes to have that attention and affection. And goodness, I think sometimes it may be subtle, but maybe very explicit that boyfriend girlfriend relationships, like, I would like you better if you lost 20 pounds.
Yeah.
Wow. That's going to be a really powerful message that a young person can hear. And depending on their heart themes and what they want and what they believe, that can be, they'll just say, okay, absolutely, I will do whatever it takes. So, and I also think the whatever it takes in terms of money, time, and effort, young women who are saying no to friends, to time with family, to sleep in order to go to the gym or to do the next diet. I just have such an urgency to say, charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised.
Yeah.
And wanting that to be our heartbeat.
Yeah. Such good stuff. Such good stuff. I don't know if our listeners know, but Josh is a certified biblical counselor, and Andrea, you are too. And I'm married to one, and I think that's been the biggest asset for me as a youth pastor for 29 years, surviving at one church. And so we're excited that you're going to join us for part 2 of this podcast on body image next time. You're coming back, right?
Yes, I'm delighted.
Okay. And I think, Josh and I will dig into a little bit more about how we can apply some of the things you said into our ministry context as youth workers and people who love teenagers. So we look forward to you all subscribing to our podcast and joining us next time with Andrea talking about body image. And may we embrace the hope and joy of the gospel and believe that it's true, powerful, and transformative. Thanks for listening to Youth Ministry Unscripted.